commodity outbreaks in a number of different parts of the world, and very concerning outbreaks. So we're seeing very concerning outbreaks in Europe. We're seeing this in the Americas. Pacific. So essentially we're seeing more than 2/3 of the global population, countries representing 2/3 of the global population now reporting cases. That is the tipping point at which we need to advise the world this is now characterized as a pandemic.
Can you still contain the virus, or is it just about mitigating its effects at this point?
We're really talking about blending. So you're quite right to use those words, contain and mitigate. Contain is so you need to mitigate those effects. You need to treat them very ill.
What else needs to happen right now?
Tiny, I wasn't prepared for
on the
that.
testing
Yes,
front,
they got
or,
fast. I got lasers.
Restrictions to behaviors,
Yeah, it came
businesses
from nowhere, man.
closing. I mean, we're seeing things kind of happen ad hoc in different countries. Does there need to be a more unified response?
Certainly testing is very important because the symptoms, as everybody has noted, are not that obvious. A lot of people have what we call a mild case. So many people who've had the cough tell me that didn't feel mild at the time, even if they were classified as having a mild case. But some people do report very, very few symptoms. So testing is really the only way you can be sure that people have the virus, and also then make decisions about asking them, isolating them, but also asking those around them who may have been exposed to self-isolate and also look out for symptoms. The other crucial thing is social distancing, because we know that this is carried by droplets and that the droplets tend to fall within 1 meter of the person who's carrying them. And as I said, they may not be aware at all, they may not feel ill, they may simply be breathing out droplets, or when speaking, we all every now and then we spray rather than say. We can't help it. But those droplets fall within 1 meter of that person. So if we can keep separate, if we can give up sort of the desire to be together in large crowds for a while, we can really limit the spread. So that's where government decisions about how to achieve that, by asking people to work from home, by reducing the number of people who will be on transport, by limiting the mass gatherings or even stopping mass gatherings, all those things can make a huge difference.
Dr. Margaret Harris is part of the coronavirus response team and a spokesperson for the World Health Organization. Thank you so much for your time.
Let's turn now to the big world in response to coronavirus. Russia and Saudi Arabia, for more than 3 years, they've been coordinating their oil production to fix prices. Last week, that deal fell. With the coronavirus threatening the world's economy, Saudi Arabia demanded that Russia cut its oil output to help prop up prices. There's Lucy and Kim reports from Moscow on how the Kremlin has reacted to that.
When the Soviet Union was still a superpower, Moscow had chilly relations with Saudi Arabia, an ally of the United States. In recent years, President Vladimir Putin has worked hard to build an energy hub in Kiev, recently chipping away at U.S. influence in the East. In October, Saudi King Salman presented Putin with full powers. Putin kept a straight face as a Saudi military band stumbled its way through the Russian national anthem. The cacophony foreshadowed the current discord in the relationship, as Saudi Arabia now floods markets with cheap oil. The effect was immediate. Here by CNBC.
Oil price war evolving. Crude prices crashed 30% in the worst drop since the Gulf War as
Saudi Arabia is betting low oil prices will force Putin to follow its lead on cutting production. Russia is heavily dependent on oil exports, but Putin's finance minister says Russia is better prepared for low prices than other oil-producing nations. That confidence comes in part from Russia's $570 billion in reserves. It's also driven by a belief that U.S. shale oil producers will do collateral damage in a price war. Since shale oil production makes economic sense, prices are high.
This is NPR News.
You are being watched all the time from space by a spy agency that most of you have never heard of.
Most people understand that some of their information is being monitored, and we just have to recognize that there's an ability to observe more from space than ever before.
Coronavirus outbreak. This is from NPR News. Day 4 on News 88.9 KNPR.
Support for Nevada Public Radio comes from Chapman Dodge Chrysler Jeep and Ram, located at East Sahara and Mojave, and Chapman Chrysler Jeep in the Valley Auto Mall in Henderson. Information at chapmanlasvegas.com. It's 8:30.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. A pandemic-fueled sell-off throws stocks deep into a bear market. The Dow's fallen more than 2,000 points, or more than 8.5%. The S&P plunged more than 7%. The Nasdaq was down nearly 6.8%. The market's responding in part to President Trump's announcement of a travel ban on most of Europe, though he also promised last night more assistance for businesses in the U.S. Here's economist Gus Fauché.
The actions to help businesses that the president talked about, those are pretty small bore, and so I think there was an expectation that perhaps the president would talk about stronger aid.
House Democrats, meanwhile, are opposed to a package to help counter the crisis that's seriously throwing off day-to-day transactions in this country. Here's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Today we'll bring to the floor our Families First legislation, which is what we talked about as soon as we finish the appropriations bill.
House Democrats' bill is wide-ranging on coronavirus response. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called it an ideological wish list. Long-term mortgage rates in the U.S. are mixed this week. The average on the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage has risen to 3.36% from its record low of 3.29 last week. At last check, the Dow is down 1,950 points. This is NPR News.
It's 8:32. I'm Nicole Robinson-Carroll with KNPR News. President Donald Trump has canceled his trip this week to Las Vegas to address the Republican Jewish coalition, citing an abundance of caution amid concerns about COVID-19. The Southern Nevada Health District says 3 more people in Clark County have tested presumptively positive for the coronavirus, which raises the number of cases in Clark County to 5 and in Nevada to 7. Most recently, a New York woman attending a conference at a Las Vegas Strip casino was hospitalized Sunday. She's in stable condition. Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas and Renown Health in Reno have opened triage tents outside their emergency rooms as a precautionary measure. Voters could soon be asked to change the Utah Constitution to allow a major shift in education funding after a deal announced yesterday with the state's largest teachers union. The compromise would include increasing the amount of money schools get per student and the creation of a $75 million rainy day fund. In exchange, the state could dip into income taxes to pay for children's health care and the needs of the disabled. Republicans like Governor Gary Herbert hailed the deal as the proverbial win-win-win. Some Democrats remained concerned about whether changing the Constitution could ultimately undermine education funding. You'll find more of the day's news at knpr.org. High temperatures around 73 degrees today in Las Vegas. Tonight's low 55 and tomorrow's high 61. Rain expected this afternoon through tomorrow. A flash flood watch runs from 5 this evening to 11 tomorrow morning. It's 57 degrees right now in Las Vegas, 54 in Mesquite, and 48 in St. George.
Healthcare in Nevada is spotty. 4 months after our series of healthcare, we're going to see if anything changed. In fact, it has changed. Clinton is changing hands there. 100 miles away, Kingston is the president. Then, in the face of a pandemic, isn't a good time to start a new business. Former Vegas TV anchor Dana Rosselli thinks so. This morning at 9 on State of Nevada.
It's 8:34.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, developing ways to use the PD-L1 pathway in immunotherapy to treat cancer. Committed to making contributions in cancer treatment for 72 years. Dana-Farber.org/. And from CFA Institute. CFA charter holders are wealth managers committed to helping unlock opportunities for their clients' ambitious wealth goals. Learn more at therightquestion.org.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm David Green.
And I'm Rachel Martin. The NBA has suspended its entire season. That decision came last night after a player with the Utah Jazz tested positive for COVID-19. NPR sports correspondent Tom Goldman is following this and joins us this morning. Hi, Tom.
Strange times, Rachel.
Strange times indeed. I mean, this was crazy last night. I mean, fans were in the stands waiting for the start of this Oklahoma City Thunder game against the Utah Jazz. And then what? Officials just came out and said the game's off? Everyone go home?
Let me take you back a little bit before that. Utah All-Star center Rudy Gobert had been sick. He'd had symptoms that led to tests for influenza, sore throat, an upper respiratory infection, and the tests were negative. And as a precaution, he was tested for COVID-19. That came back positive. Now, according to The Athletic, he's feeling good, even though he says he could have played last night before that Utah-Oklahoma City game. They said no. The game was called off right before tip-off, after the test result came back. Another game called off when it was learned that one of the refs had worked a Utah game a few days before, meaning he was potentially exposed to the coronavirus. And soon after all this, the NBA said, that's it. We're suspending the season.
Have they said anything more? I mean, what's the rationale, I guess, for the decision in this moment? I mean, you would think that it happened so dramatically, I guess.
It did. You know, the NBA hasn't answered directly why it jumped from these games to suspending everything. But what we know about the coronavirus spread, you know, it's person to person, people who are in close proximity to each other. And basketball players obviously fit that description. Right. According to ESPN, 34 players shared the floor with Gobert since last Friday, and they have lots of questions and concerns about who came into contact exactly, who might have gotten the virus as a result. And not just the players, but all the people they might have come in contact with as well. You know, so you see the potential mushrooming characteristic of this. So the season's suspended. The NBA says it'll use this hiatus to determine the next steps for moving forward in regard to the coronavirus pandemic.
I mean, what's the response been like to this decision?
Well, outside the NBA, we've heard from at least one professional sport, the National Hockey League, which says it's continuing to consult with medical experts. It's evaluating the options, and the league expects to have a further update today. Inside the NBA, you know, the words you're hearing are stunned but supportive. You know, this whole thing has escalated so quickly in the past few days. First, you had a ban on media in NBA locker rooms, then the possibility of not letting fans watch games in person, and some players were skeptical of these moves as they went along. Some even joked about coronavirus concerns. Rudy Gobert, in fact, finished a news conference earlier this week by touching all the reporters' microphones. He thought it was in jest before leaving the room. And now you wonder what those media people are thinking after last night's news.
Wait, Rudy Gobert, the same guy who contracted the coronavirus.
Exactly right.
Wow. So, what about March Madness? The Division I tournaments are supposed to start next week. What's going to happen?
Yeah, you know, and it's being hotly debated now what to do. I mean, with last night's NBA news, there's a belief by some that college basketball has to follow that lead and shut it down. The NCAA yesterday already, the other big news, it took the unprecedented step of announcing there'd be no fans at the men's and women's tournaments, in a sense taking the madness out of March Madness. The tournaments are still on right now. This changes by the hour. But if a decision to cancel happened, Rachel, I don't think too many people would be stunned at this point, the way things have happened so quickly.
Right, NPR sports correspondent Tom Goldman, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Led many states to pass stricter firearms laws in recent years, but Gun rights groups in more conservative states, take Idaho for example, are continuing to push lawmakers to go in the opposite direction. Boise State Public Radio's Heath Drusen.
In the halls of Idaho's Capitol building, Greg Pruitt is making a Facebook video.
Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here, President of Idaho Secondary Alliance.
He posts regular updates each legislative session for supporters of his influential gun rights group.
We fight hard, we play for keeps, hey, we take no prisoners.
There's been a lot of talk about guns from national politicians, but little action. The real fight is played out in the state level. Pruitt's group, for example, has pushed Idaho to get rid of nearly all of the regulations. And now lawmakers are poised to drop restrictions on out-of-state residents' right to carry weapons. That proposal sailed through the Idaho House and will likely pass the Senate. Pruitt says he long ago stopped waiting for Washington to act.
The Republicans really didn't do gun owners any favor in the first 2 years of President Trump's tenure when they had full control of the House and the Senate and obviously the White House.
Idaho has long been gun-friendly, but the state's absolutist turn is more recent. So-called no-compromise gun groups like Pruitt's have been pushing conservative states farther to the right on firearms. Wyoming dropped its permit requirement for concealed weapons, Texas passed a law last year allowing guns in places of worship, and many more bills are in the works. Back in Idaho, the climate has gotten to the point where onlookers barely reacted when an older man and a young girl stepped to the podium to testify in a legislative committee hearing, and the man said,
"My name is Charles Nielsen. This is my granddaughter, Bailey. Bailey is 11 years old. Bailey is carrying a loaded AR-15.
UCLA law professor Adam Winkler wrote the book Gunfight about America's legal battles over firearms.
If one wanted to figure out how successful the gun rights movement has been, you wouldn't look to Congress. You would look to the states.
And this is happening as the trend is going in the opposite direction in much of the country. Idaho's neighbor Nevada enacted sweeping firearms legislation last year. And just last month, New Mexico lawmakers passed a so-called red flag law, meaning courts can temporarily remove guns from at-risk people. Winkler says state gun groups are trying to fight that tide in the absence of federal legislation.
I think the gun rights groups do have a larger strategy that explains things like what's happening in Idaho. The idea is to keep the momentum alive for lifting the restrictions on guns in America.
Also telling is what hasn't passed in Idaho. Bills to keep guns away from certain sex offenders and domestic abusers both failed in the past 2 years. Boise Democrat this session, she's not even trying. Confident Republicans won't touch gun laws in an election year.
I've seen some really good representatives that have lost elections because they haven't made the emotional vote that some of those special interest groups want.
Wintrow says some Republicans who voted no on her bills privately told her they support her efforts.
Why can't we have a more balanced discussion? Why can't we talk about public safety? Why can't we talk about the facts and put some of the emotion aside?
The day we talked, Wintrow said gun lobbyists had killed yet another of her bills. This one to extend protections for sexual assault survivors. For NPR News, I'm Heath Drusen.
Going over here.
Stand down.
This is NPR News.
843 News 88.9 KNPR.
Friendly loadout on the way. Visual on care package. Enemy UAV overhead.
To slow the coronavirus's spread, colleges are canceling in-person classes and shifting to online only. How do students and faculty adapt, and what gets lost in the shift away from gathering in classes? We'll look into that in just a couple of minutes. Support for Nevada Public Radio comes from AEG Presents, announcing Bob Dylan and his band in Nathaniel Ratliff and the Night Sweats. One night only, Saturday, June 20th, Mandalay Bay Event Center. Tickets on sale tomorrow at Today's Executive Circle sponsor is Mac King, celebrating 20 years in the Mac King Comedy Magic Show, Paris, Las Vegas. Ticket information at MacKingShow.com. Two contenders, one nomination.
We are capable of making sweeping change if we have the courage to do it.
With your help, we're creating a movement here, a movement powered by the backbone of the Democratic Party.
Well, the results from 4 more states give one candidate a distinct advantage. I'm Susan Davis. Join us for live special coverage of the Democratic primaries on NPR News.
Foundation, developer of the master-planned community of Summerlin, marking its 30th year of development with new neighborhoods, ongoing evolution of downtown Summerlin, and planning to develop the remaining 6,000 acres. Information at summerlin.com. It's 8:45.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. Florida has had a fireworks ban for decades. Sparklers are okay, firecrackers not so much. But there's a loophole. Residents can buy the big stuff if they sign a form. If they swear to blow up fireworks only to scare birds away from farms and fisheries, it's totally legal. Lawmakers eventually decided that Floridians shouldn't have to lie. They passed a bill to legalize fireworks for certain holidays. It's headed to the governor's desk. It's Morning Edition.
Support for NPR comes from this station and the Skull Foundation, partnering with social entrepreneurs and innovators around the world to accelerate solutions to the world's most pressing problems. Learn more at skoll.org. From the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, working to improve the lives of individuals living in poverty and experiencing disadvantage throughout the world. Learn more at hiltonfoundation.org. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm David Green.
And I'm Rachel Martin. Ohio State, Harvard, Duke. Just some of the more than 100 universities across the country that have canceled in-person classes because of the coronavirus and then moved those classes online. Some colleges are telling students to just pack up and go home. That's not the case at all schools, though. Paige Flager of member station WOSU in Ohio reports.
Every day for the past week, colleges and universities around the country have made the announcement. In-person classes are canceled due to fears over the spreading coronavirus. Lecture halls will be empty. Labs closed, concerts canceled, sports practices called off. All classes will move online. Some universities are asking students to go home early for spring break, and if on break now, not to return to campus at all. A massive shift like this is unprecedented in higher education. It's led to an onslaught of questions for online learning specialists like Karen Costa.
I think like many folks, there's been a lot of shock and stress on a personal and professional level. My first instinct after that initial shock was, how can we get our students and faculty the support that they need to navigate this crisis?
Costa has been fielding questions on Twitter, giving webinars online, uploading YouTube tutorials, all in hopes of easing this transition, which she admits is less than ideal.
To ask somebody to go from a land-based course to an online course without any previous online teaching experience is a huge ask, and it's not something that can be done overnight, and we're trying to do it overnight.
She's spoken with professors who don't have staff or online systems in place to support this shift, and she worries about the digital divide. If students aren't allowed back on campus, some may not have access to reliable internet. As a result, students might drop out. And online learning isn't for everyone. Ohio State senior Cartier Pitts says if she wanted to go to an online university, she would have enrolled in it.
Me and virtual online learning does not get involved. I don't like learning online, so it's going to be a
longer than 2 weeks for some schools. Pitts worries these changes could keep her from graduating online. And the move has raised other critical questions about his life. Just how safe is it to have students on campus at all?
We're not at great risk of getting severely ill with the virus causing COVID-19, but they can act as tremendous amplifiers. The behaviors that young people have in college, spending a lot of time close together, intimate contact, sharing food and drink, make the spread of viruses in that setting pretty high likelihood.
Andrew Pavia is the chief of pediatric infectious diseases at the University of Utah. He says spaces like dormitories and cafeterias are indeed high-risk environments, but because of the population living there, they're not as risky as, say, a cruise ship.
The big difference with cruise ships is that they tend to have a lot of very vulnerable people. The population of cruise ships tends to be older and sicker. So So you don't have that problem in college dorms, but it is a concrete living setting where it's a lot harder to do good infection control.
But Pavia says evicting students from their dorms altogether carries its own set of risks. Some of the students may not have anywhere else to go. For NPR News, I'm Paige Flager in Columbus.
This is NPR News.
It's 10 till 9. I'm Nicole Robinson-Carroll with KNPR News. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was held recently on a container home development prototype in downtown Las Vegas. Arnold Stock, founder of the transitional housing organization Veterans Village, recently renamed Share Village, has advocated converting shipping containers into modest homes to help solve Nevada's affordable housing challenges. The project has 10 units. Stock tells KNPR there's a waiting list of 250 people, but tiny homes aren't for everyone.
It's a person that lives a minimalist lifestyle. By that I mean they don't need a closet that you walk into like we see in the tract houses. It's like a cruise cabin. They're not lavish in terms of space, but they're minimal, and they have a lot of light in them. They're very positively decorated and things like that.
Stock has another container home project in the planning stages, but says obstacles include zoning and not in my backyard activism. You can hear that full conversation at knpr.org. The National Association of Broadcasters has canceled its April trade show at the Las Vegas Convention Center. The gathering was expected to draw at least 90,000 attendees and 1,600 exhibitors, making it the fourth largest convention scheduled for this year. The NAB's chief executive says the organization is considering hosting the event later in 2020, depending on how serious the coronavirus becomes across the country. You'll find more of the day's news at knpr.org.
4 months after a series on rural healthcare in Nevada, has anything changed? Well, another clinic in a tiny frontier town has closed. It's State of Nevada. I'm Joe Shainham, and in the shadow of the coronavirus, we'll update the hit and miss healthcare of rural Nevada. That's 9 this morning on State of Nevada.
It's 8:52.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rachel Martin.
And I'm David Green. So how busy are you? And before you answer that question, just consider this. We often overestimate the number of hours we actually work. Often, even when we take work home with us, we waste more time, sometimes a lot more time than we realize. In her new book, Do Nothing, Celeste Headley writes that the obsessive things we do to make us more productive can often have the opposite effect. And there are ways, she tells us, that we can reclaim our time and use it for things we enjoy. Celeste, who has been an NPR host in the past, is with us from our studios in New York to talk about her book. Celeste, I have so many questions.
Why so many answers?
So let's start with the full title, Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underdoing. To put this out, there's a drawing of a sloth on the cover. I mean, does that mean that if I stop working, I could become as lazy as a sloth?
Is a sloth really lazy, or do they just move more slowly and deliberately? You know, some things have to go fast, but not everything does.
Well, and that seems to be much of what this book is. Assumptions that you make about something that you might think is lazy could actually be really good for you.
Exactly. You know, we have gotten to this place where we think everything needs to be as fast as possible. Everything needs to be as efficient and productive as possible. And in order to do that, we are pushing our brains and our bodies in a way that they're just not biologically or emotionally equipped to do. The brain doesn't persist. The brain pulses, which means it needs alteration between rest and focused labor. Rest and focused labor. That's what. So if you push that too far, you're just overdriving the engine, and you're gonna burn out.
When you, as you put it, realized that you were underliving.
The big one was where I was literally bedridden for the second time in less than 9 months, and thinking to myself, what is happening? Because I was more successful than ever. I had all the things that sort of checked all my boxes, right? I had plenty of money. Things were going really well for me. So why was I not just sick, but miserable? And that's where I sort of had to start questioning my own assumptions about what was it I was trying to achieve? Why was I pushing myself? Where was I pushing toward?
And that sort of started the whole cavalcade of research.
And I feel like what you talk about going through is something that so many of us can. It becomes stuff that we feel like we just need to have choice.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is I forced myself to not do it, right? I forced myself to not look at email for days at a time, and realized nothing exploded.
The world went on.
You know, I do an untouchable day each week, which is one day a week I don't look at email and I don't look at social media. And I really struggled to keep it up. I put a vacation responder that said, look, if it's really important, just call me. And it's been 2 years, David. No one has called. Nobody. And that really is telling to me that most of our emails are not urgent.
You look back at history and you tell us that this is a relatively recent phenomenon, that if you go back in time, there wasn't this obsession with working as many hours as you could, and people did actually have leisure time that made life more fulfilling.
Yeah, and that was a real epiphany for me, because I think a lot of people are getting ready to blame our current burnout epidemic on technology. And although technology does exacerbate the problem, it's not the source. And that means even if you were to dump all your electronics into the East River, you would still be overworked and miserable and unhappy. So I traced it back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And I mean, it literally changed the way our species lived and worked, almost every aspect of it. So it's not surprising that some of those changes are not working out for us. And I think it's time for us to go back and re-examine some of the things that are different now from the way that we were doing them for most of our species history, and ask if they're serving us. One of the things that's becoming quite clear is that the brain simply does not have an unlimited number of focused hours in the day. It works at its best when it puts in focused, non-multitasked hours, focusing on one thing at a time, and then gets time to not be focused on productivity. What your brain is doing is it's reshifting the things that it's learned in, say, the past 24 hours. It's shifting through memories. It's making new connections. It's doing surprising things because it's not focused on a task. And so that's where a lot of creativity comes from, and innovation, because it's making unexpected connections.
Well, and this speaks to some of the solutions that you suggested, and one critical one is to actually spend a couple weeks with like a diary charting your days. You know, people may really be surprised when they do this.
Yeah, I think it is a surprise to people because it does feel like we're working more. But you know, researchers have kept pretty good records of time use for decades now. And there's no evidence that we're working more hours, even if you calculate in polluted time, meaning the time that you spend at home answering emails. And I think that brings up a really good question of, if it is true that you are working fewer hours, and you probably are, than say your parents or grandparents, why are you so much more exhausted? That's sort of the question at the heart of this. Because I don't question anybody's claim that they're exhausted. I know they are. I was.
And what's the answer? Why are we feeling so stressed if we're not working harder than we used to?
Part of the problem is that your brain sees your phone as work. Anytime that phone is visible, your brain is expending part of its energy on preparing for a notification to come in. It's like a runner at the starting gate. In fact, they've shown in some cases that people will lose IQ points, 10 to 12 IQ points, when their email inbox is open or their cell phone is visible. You're carrying your work literally everywhere as far as your brain and body are concerned. You're never taking time off. And the thing about keeping that diary is the more honest you are, the more helpful that's going to be. You know, once you subtract sleep and work and eating and commuting and all those other things, you have probably somewhere between 5 or 6 hours a day at your disposal to do with as you please. And if you're using up half of that idly paging through Facebook and liking things, it might come as a surprise to you that you have more time than you think. And I think that was my biggest surprise. Once I cut out those things, I have so much more time now.
Celeste, thank you so much.
My pleasure, thank you.
That was Celeste Headley. Her new book is called Do Nothing. And this is Morning Edition. From NPR News, I'm David Green.
And I'm Rachel Martin.
Hostiles in the area. Track my last.
Dr. Tim Hunsaker of Desert Valley Audiology. 90.3 KSGU St. George, 91.7 KLNR Panaca and KTPH Philippi, at 88.7 KWPR Lund Ely, and at 89.3 KLKR Elko, K201HX Mesquite, K201EF Scottish Junction, and K20180 China Lake at 88.1, K203 DR Caliente at 88.5, K207CY Round Mountain at 89.3, K208 BB Laughlin at 89.5, K210 ET Moapa at 89.9, K219 AB Beatty at 91.7, K219 LM Lake Havasu City at 91.7 Beachfront Resort.
4 months after our series on rural healthcare in Nevada, what has changed? Well, another tiny frontier town has closed. It's State of Nevada. I'm Joe Shaneman. Yes, so fear over coronavirus is atop everyone's mind there. But what if it hits in rural Nevada, where healthcare is so hit and miss? The clinic in Kingston closed because it just lost so much money, and we'll update what's been happening in Tonopah. And then strip resorts are feeling the pain of the virus too. The massive National Association of Broadcasters convention just came, so it might seem like an iffy time to start a business. That isn't stopping former local TV Roselli, who joins us. That's coming up after the news from NPR.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The CDC says the coronavirus has turned up in 44 states with more than 1,300 U.S. cases confirmed so far. President Trump's temporarily halting travel from most of Europe except the U.K., hoping to prevent infected people from entry. And Wall Street's reaction is volatility. The Dow is down more than 2,000 points. Here's NPR's Windsor Johnston.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell more than 1,600 points shortly after the opening bell, plunging deeper into bear market territory. Economist Hugh Johnson says investors are rattled.
What's going on with the markets is pretty close to what we would call a panic. I mean, there's a lot of investors troubled, obviously, by the decline of the market. And I think the number one word that everybody's concerned about is uncertainty.
The S&P 500 fell 7% shortly after the open, triggering a 15-minute halt in trading. The steep losses on Wall Street come a day after President Trump announced plans to restrict most travel from Europe for 30 days. NPR News.
Well, the White House is where to concentrate federal monies on this. The Democrats have put up a multi-billion-dollar package. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says it protects average Americans.
Focus needs to be not on bailing out oil and gas companies or the cruise industry or deregulating banks. Some of the ideas under discussion at the White House by all reports, but on helping the American people cope with the crisis.
The Democrats' bill asks for free testing, paid sick leave, and other provisions. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tore it apart.
Impose permanent unfunded mandates on businesses that could cause massive job losses and put thousands of small businesses at risk.
Meanwhile, cruise lines say they're suspending all trips for 2 weeks after this outbreak. Here's NPR's Chris Arnold.
Princess Cruises says it will be canceling trips and ceasing operations for any new cruises. The company says cruises currently on board a cruise that will end in the next 5 days will continue as planned. Voyages that extend beyond that will end early. The federal government has been warning people in general, the elderly or those with underlying medical conditions in particular, not to travel by cruise ship. 2 of Princess Cruises' ships suffered outbreaks of COVID-19 cases. The Diamond Princess and its 3,700 passengers and crew were quarantined at a Japanese port. Several stricken passengers died. Another ship was brought to the port of Oakland, California, where passengers were transported to quarantine facilities. Chris Arnold, NPR News.
The Dow's now down 2,064 points, or more than 8%. This is NPR News. The NBA is suspending the rest of its regular season after a player on the Utah Jazz tested positive for the coronavirus. Paul Flav with Texas Public Radio sampled reaction from basketball fans at a popular gathering place in downtown San Antonio.
The Friendly Spot is a popular outdoor outlet for San Antonio Spurs games. It has 10 big screen TVs and a 16-foot inflatable screen. The scheduled New Orleans Pelicans versus the Sacramento Kings game was canceled, so all those screen show recaps of a suspended NBA season. General manager of the Ice House, Matt Uridi, says the crowd was eager to see one final game.
Definitely everybody was waiting, ready to see the second game, so it's definitely on the less than ideal side for a lot of people. Kind of blown away, some people were like, oh, I get it. Had half of them were like, what are they doing?
His patrons hope the Dallas Mavericks victory over the Denver Nuggets won't be the final game they see this season. I'm Paul Flav in San Antonio.
The number of Americans to file new claims for jobless insurance has fallen for a second straight week. The Labor Department says applications slid last week by 4,000 to a seasonally adjusted 211,000. The government's latest snapshot on wholesale prices reveals the biggest decline in 5 years. Prices fell 0.6% in February, led by a significant drop in energy costs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is now down more than 9%, or more than 2,100 points at 21,418. The Nasdaq is down more than 8%. S&P also down 8.2%. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the estate of Joan Rock, who's been asked to serve as and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and MacBeth.org.
It's 9:06.
From Nevada Public Radio, I'm Joe Shaneman. It's State of Nevada. Nevada's rural communities are struggling. Last fall, we featured a series focusing on places like Tonopah, whose only hospital closed in 2015. Though Renown stepped in to open a clinic in Tonopah, since we did that series, Renown is moving on, and the clinic is changing hands. What's that going to mean for Tonopah? And also in January, we're in Kingston, Nevada. Kingston is a remote community of about 100 people, some 250 miles from Las Vegas. Residents have to drive an hour or so for a routine checkup of emergency services. Joining us from Tonopah first is the Northern Nye County Hospital District's board chair, Carmen Grieber, who is closely involved in the struggle for healthcare in the county. Carmen, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Carmen, for anyone who might not remember, just briefly summarize what happened with your town's hospital and the health clinic from 2013 to 2019.
Well, that was a time of great turmoil. 2013 to 2015 saw our operator just spiral in terms of fiscal feasibility and a number of issues. In 2015, actually, the county was given that through bankruptcy from the previous operator. So at that time, we had lost a variety of services. All of our primary care was gone. The hospital, the emergency room, extended care, all services stopped when that hospital closed.
Okay. And in 2015, then, Renown stepped in. Then what happened?
Yes, Renown stepped in between 2015 and 2016, and telehealth was their primary delivery model, and that was an excellent stopgap for us. We were able to have the comfort of a regional provider in our location, seeing patients via telehealth, and then periodic visits by mid-level providers at our location. That was definitely a necessity carrying us through that time.
And now this year, the Hospital District Board of Trustees is changing the clinic's management from Renown, which is based in
G will go 1, G, 5, D, 6, E minor, and 4, C. Same progression, different key. Now you may have noticed that both of these chord progressions contain both a C major and a G major chord, but in each key, those chords function totally differently. In C major, C is the root, and G is the fifth. In G major, G is the root, and C is the fourth. As you use chords more often, you'll start to get familiar with what the degrees are in relationship to certain keys. And as you use the degrees more, you'll start to understand how the chords function. You'll know there's a certain sound when a 2 goes to a 5, or you'll understand the sense of yearning that a 4 can convey. By thinking about chords and notes as scale degrees rather than just the letter names, you're able to transcend the key that you're in and use what you learn in all keys. For example, if you only think about the letters and you find a chord progression you really like let's say E, F sharp minor, A, you don't have any way to convert that to another key. But if you think about that as 1, 2, 4, now you can understand how that can be played in any key. You can do 1, 2, 4 in D, 4 in A. And this is useful not only when you're creating music, but also when you're learning from other songs. You can understand these scale grades and decipher the songs you listen to. You'll start to notice a pattern. After all, you only have the first through 6 scale degrees, but almost every song is using chords. So you'll probably start to notice, I really like songs that are around the 4, 5, and 6. Or I'm not really a fan of the flavor of a 3 going to a 5. By using this number system, you really allow so much more musical knowledge to accumulate and compound. Practice creating chord progressions based on numbers. Pick a random key and random number sequences between 1 and 6, and practice playing those chord progressions. So for an example, I'm going to pick a key that we haven't seen in this lesson yet. How about E flat major? The first 6 chords are E flat major, F minor, A flat major, E flat major, and C minor. So now we pick random sequences of numbers between 1 and 6, we can play them as chord progressions. 5, 6, 4. How about 4, 3, 2, 1? How about that example from earlier in the lesson, 1, 5, 6, 4? Also practice deciphering keys and scale degrees. Look up the chords to a song that you like. You can usually just Google song name or chords and see if you can figure out what key it is.
Enemy UAV overhead.
With our triads, we've covered the really important chord fundamentals, but I also want to talk about inversions. So that's when you change the position of one or more notes in the chord so that the group move it to the top, E, G, C, or G, C, E. These are the same notes, so it's still a C major chord, it's just inverted. This is handy because with chord progressions, it often sounds better to find inversions that have the notes closer together rather than what we were doing before, moving the triad shape all around. So for instance, we played that 1, 6, 5, 4 in G, D, E minor, C. Why don't we move some of those chords around? Why don't we make some of them into inversions so that the notes are closer together and maybe we can find something easier to play and it sounds better. So I think I'm still going to start with this G triad. This is called first inversion. Now to move to a D next, I think instead of playing it up here with this F sharp and A, I'm going to move both of those down to this octave and play this D. So now we're going from G to D. This D stays the same, and the B moves to an A, the G moves to an F sharp. It's a really nice from G to D in that inversion. Now from the D, we want to go to an E minor, and I think the most natural thing to do would be for these notes to move back up to G and B, because those notes are in E minor, and then we'll play this E up here. That's probably the most natural thing. this inversion of B to an E minor. So our whole progression right now is... And from this E minor to go to a C, it's super easy because, again, E minor and C share two of the same notes, so we just need to move this B to a C. And so now our chord progression, which before sounded like this,
Be advised, your teammate got their ass kicked. They're RTB at this time.
has become this. It's nicer, it sounds more natural, and it'll also fit better with other instruments as they all occupy a bit more of a consistent inversions is that they'll subtly change the flavor of a chord. We can emphasize this by reinforcing the lowest notes of our chords. So for instance, G to play 1 to 4, so G to C. With the added lower octave.
Okay.
But what if I use G in second inversion with the B at the bottom of the G chord to move to that C? Reinforce that with the lower notes. I've always really loved that flavor of 1 moving to a 4, but having the third of the 1. I'm making a few different chord progressions, and this time use inversions so that they're more closely together. Necessary to pick a key by picking a root note and finding the other notes in that key using the formula for the major scale. You're able to make chords out of those notes, and you're also able to call those chords by their name and make chord progressions. The next step is to look at melodies, which are single sequences of notes played with the chords, usually above them. This is usually the thing that you would sing along to in a song, but even in instrumental music, there's usually some kind of lead melodic part that's the most interesting and the thing that's the most memorable for people. To create a melody, you already have all the raw ingredients. You can just start stringing together notes that are over top of the chord progression. But there is a interplay between what notes you're playing over which chord. A lot of it has to do with tension versus stability. The note in your melody is a note that's in the chord that's currently playing. Melodies that only use notes that match the chords are usually pretty bland. It tends to be more interesting to use some notes that are outside the chord. Typically these are passing notes, so notes that are in between two notes that are in the chord. You could even have a melody where none of the notes are part of the chords that they're played with. But that's pretty uncommon, and typically you are playing with this tension and release of involving melody notes that are part of the chord and not part of the chord. As one little tip, often you would end on a note that's within the chord rather than ending on a note that's not in the chord. Another little shortcut to melodies that mostly sound good is if you use the major pentatonic scale. So if we look at C major, and we remove the 4th and 7th degrees, so that's F and B, then we just have this. And if you play melodies with those notes over chords from C major, typically it'll sound pretty good. That's because overall those notes are the most stable over most of the chords. Pick a key and create a chord progression in that key, then record that into your music software. Once you have that, try to play some melodies over it, thinking about what notes are in the chord that's currently playing, and maybe some that aren't, but that can resolve the notes that are in the chord. Also try removing the 4th and 7th degrees from your major scale to make a major pentatonic scale, and then try playing melodies using that scale. You might find that it's even easier to get something sounding good. For a quick example of finding a major pentatonic scale, why don't we look at the key of F? The notes there are F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E. So if we number those, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. B flat is the 4, E is the 7. We'll take that out of our scale, leaving us with F, G, A, C, D. That is the F major pentatonic scale. The last component of theory fundamentals is rhythm and how to count. How do you tell when things are played? Whether that's chords or melodies or drum beats, that's based on the musical counting system. Music is divided into equal-sized portions called bars or measures, and typically in Western music you'll have 4 beats to a measure, which we count 1, 2, 3, 4. So if one note is the length of the bar, we call it a whole note. If it's 2 beats, which is half of the bar, we call it a half note. And then each of those 4 notes that we're counting of the bar are quarters of the bar. So you can have sounds, instruments, whatever playing on or anywhere in between them. If something is
Battle Royale. You've got gas closing in fast. Get to the safe zone.
on the beat, then we would say it's on the 1, for example. But if it's in between these beats, then we need to do what's called subdividing, which is like increasing the resolution of our counting. If we subdivide beats in half, we count it as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and those ands are exactly halfway in between each of those beats, so now that resolution is 8th notes. We can subdivide further, again getting exactly halfway in between our main beats and our ands, so that would be 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. So that puts us at 16th notes, and even though you can keep on subdividing forever, the main parts of songs are usually not played any faster than 16th notes. And this really is a pretty universal system in Western music. If you're talking to anybody who's had some music education and you say something is on the 2E, they'll probably know what you're talking about. So getting used to using this counting system will allow you to play music better because you'll be able to better feel where you are within the beats. It'll also allow you to interpret and decipher and remember different kinds of rhythmic material because it gives you a structure for those rhythms to live in. So let's say you're out and about and you get an idea or you hear something that you want to try but you can't actually make it right then. You can make a quick note of it using this kind of rhythmic notation. Let's say we had a beat idea that was like we could jot that down into this number system. I've made this one a little pretty for the video, but you can do this really quickly. Freehand, I do that all the time. So I've got kick, snare, and hat here, and then a grid of 16 spaces lining up with our 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Well, I know that the snare is on the and of 1 and the 4. I know there's a kick on 1. So it's gonna do 2 and 3, and then the hi-hats are 1E and a 2E. I think it's on the 2E. Yeah. Yeah, that's our beat idea. And the first few times you do this, you might have to really slow it down and be counting along really deliberately and finding those beats and where they line up to what you want to do. But as you do this more and more, you'll get way better at it, you'll get way faster at it, you'll just know what it feels like to be on certain beats, and you'll know how to make note of your ideas. Or, again, this grid is just like your DAW. You'll know how to input those beats into your DAW really quickly. For practice, take a song that you like and select an element like one line of melody or a drum beat and see if you can write out its rhythm using this basic 16th note notation. Alright, I know that's a lot to take in. Definitely try to make some time for those practice exercises, and of course, come back to this video as much as you want to use it.
Hold it for deployment. Now's a good time to warm up.
Alright, I know that...
Most musical sounds have an identifiable pitch. This does not, but this, and this,
Alright, that's enough fucking about.
Some
Now we do
complicated
this for
sounds
real.
have many pitches at once, but for now let's just talk about single pitches. Which comes from a dominant frequency in the sound. Picking pitches listen as a second note gradually moves away from the first note.
You've got gas closing in fast. Get to the safe zone.
Disappear into a single note. Notes are still there. But this special distance between notes is called quantum. Don't worry about the name, it's just a label. We think of notes in octave apart almost as being the same note in some sense. If you pick a note on the line, you can find the octave above. You can also find the octave below. And these notes have an octave above them below the so you can start with anywhere on the note that is chosen, which divides itself naturally in the markers based on the note. Since we know every note magically divides itself, this octave can sit anywhere. Divide the octave into 12 equal pieces. Why 12? Fascinating question, no time to explain. These 12 notes, spaced in this way, are the foundation of almost all melodic music on Earth. Between any two of these 12 notes are infinite in-between notes, but from this point forward, when I say note, I will be talking about the 12 fixed notes of the octave. Here are the 12 notes on the neck of the guitar. Each course of string in a piano represents one of these notes. Some instruments use complicated keying systems, but they are playing the same notes. With some instruments, there are no frets or keys, and it's up to you to find the notes yourself. Let's play through all the notes. Now, let's play some of the notes and leave the others alone. We'll include the octave notes and some, but not all, of the inner notes.
Enemy personal radar in the air.
We've created a scale. A scale is a selection of some of the notes between the octaves. Here's another scale. It sounds like this. There are countless different scales. You can make up your own, but there are a few scales that are most common. This one is called the major scale. Commit this pattern to memory. Don't worry about why it's called the major scale, it's just a label. Let's number the notes in this scale. Relax, this is not math. These are not numbers in the mathematical sense, they're just labels. Sometimes the notes are labeled do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We could have labeled them red, orange, yellow, green, or Alice, Bob, Carol, Dan. One tradition even uses shapes to label them. The labels are arbitrary. Note how the 1 is repeated. Remember, that's the octave, so the counting just starts over as you go up or down. Also referred to as the root. 12 notes in the octave with a separate number. That would arguably be a more straightforward way to label the notes. Instead, we number the notes based off the major scale. But then how do we refer to the notes in between the scale notes? We borrow the terms sharp and flat. This note is not in the major scale. It is sharp of the 1 and flat of the 2, so we can call it either 1 sharp or 2 flat, and we use these symbols to indicate that. 1 sharp and 2 flat refer to the same note. The same is true for the other notes outside of the major scale. Notice that there is no 3 sharp or 4 flat. This is just a byproduct of the label. Notes that don't have a sharp or flat label are also referred to as natural notes, and you'll sometimes see the natural symbol next to them to emphasize this. Remember, there's nothing special about a sharp or flat note, they are just labels. Underneath the labels are always just the same friendly 12 notes. Any two notes right next to each other are said to be a half step or a semitone apart. Notes that are 2 half steps apart are said to be a whole step or a whole tone apart, sometimes just called a step. So far we've talked about notes in a relative sense. If I tell you to sing the 3 note and I don't give you any other information, you can't do it. It's like telling you to stand 3 meters from the starting line without telling you where the starting line is. We usually talk about pitch in a relative sense because that's how most of us perceive it. You can hear this major scale note. I'm going to shift it a bit in one direction or the other and play it from a different starting point. It sounds different, but we recognize it as the same melody because the relative position of the notes is the same. But sometimes we use absolute pitch names, which refer to particular unmovable places on the line of pitch. These are the note names familiar to many as A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Consider this note. It is the This is just like the notes we worked with before, except this one is fixed to a frequency of 440 hertz, meaning 440 vibrations per second. We can't slide it. A is always A, assuming the instrument is in tune. There are, of course, octaves in A, but their frequencies are fixed in relation to the original, which is used to define the notes. We divided the octave into the same 12 notes. These get labeled A through G like this. The individual notes get labeled as well. Now with these labels, there is no B sharp or C flat, and no E sharp or F flat. It looks slightly different. Commit it to memory and don't worry about it. So how do these two worlds come together? Let's start visualizing the line of pitch with the absolute pitch labels on. Actual, verifiable frequency of the same line of pitch just above it. Now, this major scale can slide around anywhere on the line of pitch and it works just fine. But if we want to find a selection of absolute notes that matches this pattern, we just slide our scale down until the 1 lines up with one of the absolute pitch locations. Here we line the 1 note up with an E note. Now we can play the major scale again, and this time we are playing it starting on an E note. We call this the E major scale. We can list the notes we are using based on the pattern of the major scale. E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and E. Many seasoned musicians can spell a scale like this in their heads, and it may seem impressive, but it's not. The pattern is simple, as you've seen. Let's try another one, this time starting on C. This will sound almost the same to the ear, of course. It's the same scale, just from a different position on the line of pitch, but the spelling will obviously change. This time we get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. How about that? We didn't have to say sharp or flat at all. Some scales use more sharp or flat labels than others. The C major scale happens to not need any. This does not mean the C scale is special or primary or powerful in any way. And of course we can do this with any scale of any shape to find the spelling of that scale rooted at a particular note. We don't have time to cover all the other common scales, but let's talk about one called the natural minor. Shown here is the good old major scale. In contrast, the natural minor looks like this. It sounds like this. See how the third note in the scale is a 3 flat? Any scale with a 3 flat in it is called a minor scale. Any scale with a natural 3 in it is called a major scale. So there are actually lots of different minor scales. The major scale is always used to refer to the one we want to see. Let's start again with the major scale. We skip the 4 and the 7 and the scale is just 5 notes plus the octave. This gets the dedicated name of the major pentatonic scale. It sounds like this.
Approaching your position, move to the safe zone.
If we remove the 2 note and the flat 6 note from the natural minor scale, we have another 5-tone scale. This one also gets a tone.
Nice patch there. That's our DZ.
Let's say someone is playing the notes in the major scale. They're playing up and down from the 6th note to the 6th note. They're only playing notes in the major scale. If you walk into the room, your ear is like a touch. It's different. A musician playing this trick to the ear.
Alright lads, let's get it done.
If we label the notes using the same numbering patterns we label all scales with, you can see that what your ear is perceiving is a pretty different scale from the major scale. Coincidentally, this particular scale happens to be the natural minor scale we looked at a minute ago. This trickery is called a mode. By simply using the major scale notes differently, we get a different scale for free. The musician can create this effect by clever selection or emphasis of notes when playing, or by playing different chords in the background to guide the listener's ear. So a mode is just another scale. It's a shortcut. Once a musician knows a scale pattern on their instrument and in their muscle memory, they can easily play modes of that scale. You can make a mode from any scale you play, not just the major scale. Since the major scale has 7 notes in it, you can make 6 modes in addition to the bass scale. The modes of the major scale have special names like Dorian, Mixolydian, and so on. These are just convenient labels. Now that you understand the underlying framework of scales, you can go wild. Exactly what order you play these notes in is entirely up to you, in whatever genre you may be trying to conform to. When you approach a piece of music, figuring out what scale is in use is often a smart starting place. Find the root note by ear and go from there. It takes a little practice, so start with easy tunes. Once you find the absolute notes used in a scale, start thinking of them in relative terms, and understand the shape of the scale within the 12-note line of pitch. Thinking of the scale in a relative sense allows your ear to start recognizing what scales sound like, regardless of what key they are in. Part 2 will cover intervals, harmony, chord naming, and chord progressions. Part 3 will cover rhythm. I hope this video was useful to you. These videos do take weeks to produce, so if you have like 50 cents or $1 or $1,000 or $1 million, there's a link down there in the hoop-de-hoo for donations. Thanks.
So here's an unknown fact nobody cares about. I have a third moniker, or alias, or nickname, whatever it is. I produce music under DJ Chariot, and I only have one vinyl release that I put out maybe 2-3 years ago at this point, so it's been a while. The reason I use so many different monikers is because, for example, DJ Chariot lets me focus in on just this analog techno sound, kind of the same way I don't really like multitasking. I'm more of a monotasker, not sure if that's a word, and this just lets me focus in on analog, fast, and drums. Like, that's really it. Really simple. CF, all samplers, Ricky Tinez, kind of a bit of more house music hybrid stuff. I mean, Ricky Tinez is just a shortened version of Enrique Martinez, Ricky Tinez. And yeah, DJ Chariot, haven't done a record in a while, so let's hopefully try to make one. Let's see how this goes. Let's jump into it.
Found a shotgun.
Alright, so for this setup, pretty simple. I got the drum brute impact here, running MIDI clock into the Avalon, and that's really it. Just thinking that Everything's going into the 414. In terms of what you are hearing, this is a 4-track cassette recorder, tape deck, whatever you want to call it, and right now it's just serving the purpose as my mixer. So I just have 1 and 2, basically 1, 2, and then 3 is the effects return from the pyramids, and that's on effects send 1. So if I turn up like effects send 1, it'll basically send the impact to the pyramids. Turn it up on 2, send this over there, and I have a mix control on it on channel 3. And that basically just allows me to have the sound, and the longer one, I guess you can say. So like I said, what you're hearing is not a cassette. I just have the cassette because I eventually am going to record this song. And this song, I'm probably not going to finish the entire video. That'll probably take way too long, but I'll get the general idea and then I can kind of hash it out from there. So yeah, let's go ahead and start with some drums. I love this thing, by the way, the Impact. I have the Drum Brute regular version, and man, this kick and the hats, they fixed a lot of good things in this. I really like the way this sounds. I'm at 126. Like I was saying earlier, DJ Chariot's a lot faster and a little harder, analog based. These are all analog. I guess you can say the tape's analog. This is DSP, but whatever. Kick. That's cool. Actually, you know what? Now that we got that, let's just get the bass down. Color that up. There we go. That'll work. I can go color. Cool. Cool, so now we have 2 bars of that. Actually, you know what? We'll leave it at that for now. Focusing on this. Super simple. Just hit record.
Survive and you can redeploy.
Cool, so that's that first pattern. I'm gonna copy that pattern over to 2, pattern 2.
Pay attention, you'll be out there soon. Get ready to
Cool,
fight.
over
You're
there.
next.
Take this open hat. Alright, I got 2 bars.
You win this fight and you return to the front line. If you lose, you're done here. Time to earn your freedom.
Yo, these hats sound so much better. Dude, this right here. So this here. What's tight is I can go back and see what these notes were. So it's this one here and that one. Oops, too low. Cool. You see these little markers right here? It's kind of the sweet spot I found. Ignore that plane flying overhead. Alright, let's go ahead and copy this. 3. Cool. Go to pattern 3. Alright, let's get the drums a little more interesting, because this is cool, but it's a little basic, right? Kick. be broken up a little. Oh, that would be cool if we just went. Yes, that's dope. Erase this. And let's turn quantize off. Missed it.
Enemy UAV overhead.
Erase that hat. Let's do it on every other. Alright, watching this back, I'm starting to realize that making music is pretty boring to watch. So, to save you a ton of time, I'll give you the gist of it. Long story short, made a pattern, messed up that pattern, tried to recover it, couldn't, lost inspiration, turned on the effects pedal, gained inspiration, and carried on. Alright, back into it. One of my favorite things is effects, right? So if I just turn up 1 and activate this. Hear how crazy that sounds? Just wait till you hear it with a kick. Ready to blow your ears out? Damn. Throw this back in. Listen to that. Right there. That just changed the entire song. It went from this super boring whatever to something actually pretty sick, because this adds enough movement to the mundane pattern that I'm making here to kind of create just like a little bit of just some movement, some general movement that is super useful when it comes to creating patterns, especially when it comes to house music and techno, because it's like you want to have enough of the same rhythm that people start to lose their mind. I mean, this is my mentality when I come to making tracks. I like making a lot more Tool style songs where it's really easy to mix, it's pretty repetitive, and in a sense predictable, but that's a dangerous word because that sounds like a bad thing, but I kind of like that because people can really get into the groove of something, but there's something kind of always happening that your body picks up on, but your ears might not, or you might not be able to pinpoint what's going on. So something like this is really good to add a little bit of movement. You know what? I'm gonna just stick to my guns. Let's just do this. Copy 5. We'll go to 5. Now we're here on 5. We need this to be solid, really pumping, right? Maybe filter B. And we'll go here, clear that, envelope section 16. And I'm gonna just envelope, we'll make this to 6. Yeah, now we're cooking with fire. Alright, so if this pattern's cool, I'm gonna copy this pattern to 6, not make that mistake, go to 6, go to symbol. Give some code. Add some of these weird times. Ooh, there it is. Got the feedback. So this I would just perform live. Let's get really gnarly. Oh my god, this is so sick. Let's add some randomness to this kick. That'll really beat this thing up. Mute it for a second. Dial this in. Turn the resonance down, get really bassy. Yep, there it is. That's it. Yep. I might just have to release this as is. Straight from the H4n. Hold it, hold it. Dude, that randomness. Oh my god. Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps again. This is too tight. And then break it down like this. Let's get this one a little quieter. Play this through. There it is. Just let it sit real quick. That. Oh my god, I love that. Oh, there it is. Bringing it back in. Man, this is too sick. This is what DJ Chariot's about. Hit these gnarly spots. All right, let's see if I can build this up without messing it up, and then we'll call it a day. And I want to just solo the kick. Yep, nailed it. Yep. There it is. So this is tight because you can get new rhythms just by moving this. Too far. Pop it up a little. Give it a little bounce. So then I want to turn everything down here, so then I can build it up myself. Bring that symbol in. Now that that's soloed, gotta build all this stuff back up. Ah, ah, ah. See how fucked up that is? And we're back. Just go all out. Then bring it down. Let it build up again. Let's see if I can do this correctly. I want to change it to 3 steps and just solo the kick. And I'm gonna just end the track right here. Shorten it up. Pull that feedback a little bit. Yep. Oh, I want to continue so bad, but I gotta pull this back. Anyway. Yo, I hope you found this video helpful. Didn't really do anything helpful, it just kind of jammed. But yeah, that's kind of me and my process for making a track when it comes to the DJ Chariot side of my monikers, my many monikers or aliases, whatever you want to call them. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, ton of fun. Thank you, Arturia, for sending me this Drum Brute Impact. I've been wanting to check it out for a long time. It is so worth it because this kick, these hats, that clap on a system like in a club, my god, this thing sounds insane. Anyway, you already know the drill. Share the love, share the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Peace. I'll catch y'all soon.
This is the Arturia BeatStep Pro. The BeatStep Pro takes the idea of the original BeatStep and runs with it. It's a hardware sequencer and it can operate completely independently of a computer. And what's amazing about the BeatStep Pro is it lets us make complete musical ideas. We can sequence multiple devices just from this one interface in a really simplistic but really entertaining and immediate fashion. The original BeatStep let us control one lane of sequencing, but this lets us control two. And we also have a drum lane. So we're able to send two sequences and percussion, or just gates, which could be firing off other things, not just percussion, it could be clocking things too, and all from one device. Also, like the original, we have this ability to put it in control mode, where we can use the pads to send MIDI, and we use these knobs to send MIDI CCs. So that could be controlling software if you've got it connected to the computer, or it could be controlling hardware if you've got it hooked up via MIDI. You can send CCs with this. The BeatStep Pro is completely system agnostic. You can connect it to basically anything. So I can control VSTs, drum racks, drum synths, anything in my computer that will respond to MIDI. I can sequence it from this awesome physical interface. But USB is only the tip of the iceberg. We also have MIDI. So we're able to sequence MIDI devices with this if we wanted to. We could be sending sequencer 1, sequencer 2, and our percussion on completely independent MIDI channels so that we could control a whole, a rack of MIDI gear. And lastly, we have an insane complement of analog connectivity as well. We have two completely independent CV and gate outputs, which also have this third lane for velocity, which is like a sort of voltage modulation. And we could use that to control pretty much anything. If you've got a modular or a microbrute or something like that, you can use that velocity lane to control the filter or the amplifier or, anything really, as long as you've got the input for it. So it's a modulation source, a bonus that we can program from here. And then we also have gates. There are 8 gate outputs on this thing, so that we can use this thing, the drum output, to control analog drum modules. I have the Tip Top Audio 808 and 909 modules here, and they are just directly connected to the back of the BeatStep Pro. And if we're using it via MIDI or USB, in fact, we can send 16 lanes of gate data. And of course, I'm using drum modules here, but if nothing stops you sending this into advanced sequencers, just fire off sounds or fire off modulation and stuff. There's lots of creative things that you can do with gate outputs, even if you don't have drum modules. So this is just one application. And the other thing to stress, I don't have a computer here, but I really want to stress the fact that this is completely agnostic in terms of what it works with. It's insanely fun doing this thing with VSTs as well. So I have a bunch of hardware here, that's what we're going to play with, but you don't need this to have this much fun with this thing. It'll basically work with whatever you've got, unless you have some kind of wax cylinder or something, in which case, I'm really sorry, but we can't help. The way it works is like this. If I go to sequencer 1, you see this little keyboard appear. These are the black notes and these are the white notes. And that is my Juno 60, which actually has been MIDI retrofitted in a really twisted, weird way. The oldest machine on the table actually has MIDI. So we can play it like a keyboard, and you see here we have a little indicator that says these are octave up and down. If I push this, so we're able to play the source with this little funky keyboard. And if I hold Shift, you see we get this extra thing, which actually up the top is very much like the BeatStep. We have a bunch of different scales. So there's like chromatic, major, minor, Dorian, mixolydian, harmonic minor and blues, But most interesting of all, this one on the end, which is user scale. So what the user scale lets us do is when we plug this in, we use the MIDI control center software and we're able to pick a scale. And at the moment, I've got A sharp Phrygian, which I basically looked up and is like Aphex Twin's favorite scale. So I thought since I've got all this sort of analog acid gear, that would be a fun one to try. So I have my user scale set up that way, and you can set it up however you like. You just go in and pick the notes that you want it to correspond to. We also have the ability to sequence in different ways. As in, once I've inputted a sequence, it can go forwards, or I can do this, and then the sequence will start playing reverse. Alternate is basically where the sequence is going back and forward, and triplet is changing the timing. We also have time divisions here so that we can sort of clock, speed up and slow down the sequence accordingly in relationship to one another. There are some other important things to point out, i.e. swing, randomness, probability, and this funky roller looper thing. So we're able to adjust the probability that notes will occur, the randomness within the scale of the notes, adding a kind of unknown element to our sequence, and swing. And we can do this per track or globally. It's really fun doing this with drums, for example, especially on randomness, because it starts to like improvise drums based on, you know, the kind of roll of a dice. And then down here we have drums. So I'm able to just hit the pad and hear my modules. Very cool. And then once again, I've got my sequence up here and my microboot here. If I hit play, here's what I made earlier. I can mute the drums if I want to do everything at once, or I can hold drum and mute and just mute parts of them. Bring them all back in. I'm going to start a sequence from scratch. So let me clear this. So shift and clear pattern. Now shift and clear pattern on sequence 2 and clear here. So we're just starting from a blank slate. With everything cleared, I'm able to hit play and record. And you see that we're looping within 16 beats here. I can just octave shift down. I'm able to jam in using this as a kind of keyboard. And then I can come down here and then turning off record. Yeah, I like that. So, but then if I want to work in a kind of 8080 style way, if I hold drum and this, because I want to mess with my maraca, now if I do this, I'm able to just edit that. And then I can add swing per track. Or introduce this idea of randomness. Really fun. Super immediate. No keyboard was touched, no mouse was touched. If I want, I can extend this sequence. So if I hold shift and then this, my weird little Juno melody here is extended onto a other line. I'll just mute my drums. So now actually my Juno melody is over 2 bars. So if I come down here, and now let's start working in a kind of old school way. If I look here, this knob corresponds to number 6 here that says 6. So if I adjust here, oh, I'm in gate mode by the way. See the thing updates? And very nice, these are touch sensitive. If I want to see what note I've got selected, I can put my finger on the knob and I can see it. C#3. So, and 10 is active. And I can just sort of try different notes, kind of listen. Do I like the sound of that? Does that do something nice to my sequence? Is it right or not? It's a kind of experimentation. You don't quite know what's going to happen to the melody when you turn the knob, but if you mess around enough, you just sort of come across these little satisfying little combos. Because I'm working in this freeform way, I end up putting like the claps in a different place. If I was programmer, I would have probably just put them on the 5 and 13. But this whole sequence has been started kind of off the grid in a way. And what's nice is that we have this thing called last step. So if I go to sequencer 2 and I hit last step, what it does is it allows us to sort of shorten the sequence. So now the sequence is going to repeat when it gets to this point. So it's looping out of kilter with sequencer 1. So now I'm building in variation. I've extended the length of my drum. Wicked. So you see how it's kind of freeform in this way. We can work in a rigid fashion and start everything on the 1, or I can just kind of put stuff in as I feel it's meant to come in. And there's just interesting things that happen when you give yourself like a physical interface to work from. The interface kind of informs the process in its own way. One really nice thing that I can do is I can transpose the whole sequence. I've got transpose link here, which means that the sequences transpose with one another. If I hold the sequencer button down, then I just have to go very important thing is that we can save sequences into this thing. There's a project that I've currently got selected, and we can have up to 16 projects. And a project is made up of 16 different sequencer or drum patterns, totally independent of one another. So if you were putting together a live set and you had a bunch of different melodies based on a scale and stuff, it'd be really easy to store them and recall them. Oh, actually, I didn't talk about gates. I'll put in some notes. And then you see here, we can cycle through pitch, velocity, which is that extra like lane of modulation per note, and then gate down here. We can extend them out. But what's awesome is if you notice, when I twizzle this all the way to the end here, beyond 99, we get ties and slides. And this allows us to make really interesting sort of acid. You hear that slide? Oh, wow. Speed the whole thing up. Let's mess with probability. I hope that gives you a good sense of how it works. It's very straightforward. There's not really a great deal else to it. So I think probably the best thing to do is I just play around. Let's actually just make some sequences. I hope you get a sense of how fun it is, basically, to experiment with a piece of hardware without having to look at a screen and without having to use a keyboard and mouse. I've doubled the sequence. And then I come down to sequencer 1. So I'll give myself 64 steps to work within my sequencer. So I've just extended nothing. Nice. Now I have the velocity connected to the filter input on the microboost, so I'm able to adjust sequence the microboost filter with the control. Fun. Let's do something a little bit less maudlin in the major key. also ended up slightly kind of maudlin. Alternating now. And now let's alternate this. If I come to shift, you see that I've got a snare drum on the 5 and the 13, and once again, that's labeled on 5 and this is labeled on 13. With shift selected, and then here, you hear how that slips that note slightly out of time. Too early now. What we're able to do here is we're subtly adjusting the timing of the drums in a way we can slip and slide the drums to give a groove, a feel. Arturia BeatStep Pro. It's insanely fun to mess around with. It works with all kinds of gear. If you have CV gear, if you have MIDI gear, if you just have a computer, this thing will work with all of those things and actually at the same time. So have fun, and we look forward to hearing what music you make with it. Thanks. Hello, this is the Arturia BeatStep Pro. The BeatStep Pro takes the idea of the
Here we have the new Arturia BeatStep Pro, which is obviously a step up from the original BeatStep. We've got the Volca connected here. It's just receiving MIDI clock. And I can change the clocking from the BeatStep Pro, and it changes the tempo of the Volca. Now, we've got a number of different modes here. We've got, in project mode, we can select 16 different projects, which we can recall on the fly. We've got the control mode, where we can use the controllers, the knobs for different kind of control, MIDI control and things like that. Sequencer 1, which can output MIDI and also CV gate information. A number of different steps, up to 64 steps. Sequencer 2, exactly the same. And then the drum sequence, which is like a TR style drum sequence, which can send MIDI, or it can actually send to one of the trigger outputs on the back, which is really nice. So what we're going to do now is kind of dive in with the sequence. We've got it connected up to a Roland System 1M, and I'm going to get this pattern going. And you can hear we just got this simple pattern. You can see the little green steps flashing by. The ones that lit up are the ones where it actually plays the sound. I can actually add a step. I can flick between different patterns as well, which might be different lengths. And we can just do that on the fly. So it's quite a nice way of actually playing around and seeing what happens. We can change the play mode, forwards, reverse, alternate, and so on. And that's stored with each of the different patterns. Triplet, and also we've got half speed, double speed, and so on. So there's quite a lot of flexibility there in terms of actually the way in which it plays back. Adjusting a knob will actually play back the sound, so you can actually hear what you're doing, and that this is controlling the pitch output to the System 1M. Now you can actually change the scale, so if we want to change to something like a minor scale. As I adjust that, you can see that we actually get the different notes coming through based on the minor scale. Now this is one of the advantages, I guess, of having a digitally controlled system, in the sense that it can actually play proper scales and it's calibrated. We can actually choose how it's actually calibrated in terms of the quantizing of pitches. Let's choose some different steps. So we've got our pattern going back some forwards there. You can actually also use the record button for actually playing stuff in real time. There's a facility for outputting a metronome pulse via MIDI. And we also can choose the gate time. So each of these controllers now, as you can see the numeric display updating. You can see that we can actually change the length of the notes. For each of the different steps. Now we've got a little bit of a release on the synth sound at the moment anyway, so you get a slightly rounded release, but then we are changing the overall length of the note there. Now we can also transpose sequences in real time. So we hold down the sequencer button, sequencer 1, and we choose a different note on the pad keyboard. We can transpose there in real time. Now you can do this on a per sequence basis, or you can do it globally, so everything gets transposed apart from the drum tracks, of course. We've got a roller looper mode here, which repeats different elements. So it's something that's kind of, I guess, slightly borrowed from Volcas and things like that, which is quite interesting, quite nice to have. Now if we go into the velocity control here, what we get is an extra CV out, which can be used to control velocity, but in this case we're going to use it to control the filter cutoff. So it's another set of channels, sequencer lanes, which I can use to output different control voltages. So we're now actually using this to control filter cutoff. Here we have the new Arturia BeatStep Pro, which is obviously a step up from the original BeatStep. We've got the Volca connected here. It's just receiving MIDI clock. And I can change the
Hello, welcome to another Sonic Lab. That is the Arturia BeatStep Pro. You've probably seen a little bit about this already, or quite a lot actually. We did this fantastic presentation with Alex from Source, who are the UK distributors. And now I've got my very own here to play with, which is what I've been doing. In fact, what I've got here is Simmons SDS8, which is providing the drums, Boomstar SE80, which is providing the bass line, and the Dreadbox Erebus, which is providing the top line. So there's been a lot of hoo-ha about the Arturia BeatStep Pro since it was first announced. It's been taking a little time to get here, but now it's here. Here it is, and it is a lovely thing. It takes the form factor of the original BeatStep and adds it. If you weren't already aware, I'll just give you a quick recap. We've got 3 sequencer channels. We've got CV and gate 1, CV and gate 2, and then an 8-gate drum sequencer, which you program across these pads. Additional pads can also output over MIDI. In fact, this all can output over MIDI as well, so you can create some quite big multi-voice drum patterns. And I've been playing with it for a little while. In fact, it's been really hard to get on with this review because every time I start going off, I'm sort of noodling endlessly, which is what this thing kind of really does encourage. It's surprisingly solid. It's got quite a lot of mass to it, which makes it feel like it's actually kind of should be more expensive than what it costs. In fact, I may as well say this now. I think the street price is about 189 quid. Just to reiterate, as well as the 3 channels of sequencing, because we've got CV and gate out and velocity out for this, CV and gate out velocity for the yellow one, and then the drum trigger outputs. We've also got a controller mode, which allows us to turn the entire surface into MIDI controller. This can be just CCs, which we've got here, or we can press the knobs into Mackie Huey mode, and that turns this part of the unit into this be level, pan, this is mute, track mute, and solo. So we've got an additional kind of mode here, which gives it full controller mode. Additionally, when we're in controller mode, we can actually change the behavior of these pads to be controller or note on, note off, or toggle controller on, control off. So we do get quite a lot of additional stuff. This all has to be configured in the actual MIDI command center for BeatStep Pro. This is it here. This is running on Mac OS X. It also runs on Windows. So it allows us to configure it in a great number of ways. So, you know, outside of just the straight sequencing system, we've also got a lot of other things. Let's just take a look at the panel connection as well. We've got an on-off switch. We've got the USB connection, which is micro USB, comes with a lead, and this transmits both power and MIDI data. Then we've got MIDI in and out. You get these little adapters, which are like DIN, mini DIN connectors. You get 2 of those. Then you've got clock in and out, which can be set to pulse or DIN sync. Once again, you get another adapter which allows you to hook this up. This is the one with the black lead to your maybe your 808 or your 303, or it can just be regular pulses. You've got that in and out, so you can set syncs in various different ways. Then we've got the individual pad outputs, which are the gate outputs, which can be set to positive and negative polarity, V-trig or S-trig format. Then at this end, we've got the CV outputs. We've got 2 channels of these. Sequencer 1, obviously the green one. We've got pitch to CV, which can be hertz, volts, or volt per octave. So you can run different standards of Eurorack gear. And then you've got velocity output, which is another CV output, not as accurate as this one, and that can send out velocity data for each sequence, so it's like another channel effectively. Then you've got the gate output, which again can be set to trigger polarity. These sequencer outputs also can be set to transmit on MIDI channels, which again can go out via the MIDI output, or you can send MIDI over USB as well. So with all those clocking possibilities, you're going to need to set your sources. So as we can see here, we've got a sync button which allows us to be internal, USB, so you can receive clock over USB from your host DAW if you're running it in that mode, MIDI input, or the clock input. So you've got quite a number of clocking potential there, which means you can run this as the heart of the system or ancillary to the system, or maybe run a couple of them together. You could send clock out and be clocking from a second BeatStep Pro. So you could set up a pretty major sequencing system if you really wanted to do that. So more on the actual sequencer itself. The sequencer basically is a 16-step sequencer, but it is possible using these buttons here to
basically change the length of the number of steps. So we've got 16, 32, 48, 64. So that's up to 4 bars if you're running in 16ths. And simply do that, you just press the last step button, and then this step will change to the last step. If you want to go to a 4-bar pattern, you just go to last step and then press the last step. In this one, I'm at a 2-bar pattern, so that basically works that way. The other thing that I can do is if I just turn these down, you'll be able to see, if I press both of these cursor keys, you can see here, they both light up. And now when I play, it will jump between the number of bars, so I can always see where I am in a pattern, which is quite useful. Not all sequencers do that, so that's actually quite an extra useful feature. Another thing that's also worth mentioning when we're into the step mode is if I press play, I've just got this bass line, I press shift, and you can see here that I'm in 8's time. So I can actually set the resolution of the sequence to be 8s, 16s, 32s, or quarter notes. So I could have a kind of 4-bar 16 part, I could have a 4-bar quarter note part, or a 2-bar or a 1-bar or a 1-step. So I can create those kind of concentric cycles of rhythms, which are really, really neat. Now, a word about memory structure. The BeatStep Pro works in projects. You press the project button, you've got up to 16 projects here, which you select from pressing the project button and then selecting a project. Additionally, if you want to save a project, you press and save, press and hold, and the project will save in that location. Each project also contains 16 patterns per track. So there are 16 patterns that you can have on each track. You can have it so that they tie if I change presets, then they will all change together, or I can have them changing separately, which lets me mix things up an awful lot. Now, this is something that really caught me out. To save a sequence, if I press and hold the track, then I press the save button, then I select any one of these patterns to save the sequencer in. Now, one thing that I did notice on this, certainly, if I just play the sequence here, and I save my project, I do get a little bit of pause in playback. It seems to affect the CV and gate, the voltage-based outputs, as opposed to MIDI. Storing individual patterns with a track, you don't get that jump, so it's possible to create a pattern on the fly, copy it, and keep working without any interruption in workflow. Now, about those CV outputs, I mean, the thing that's quite interesting about this is that even though it's only getting 5 volts via USB, it can still send a full 10 volt range across 2 CV sequences, and also the gate output is plenty high enough to drive pretty much any kind of gate input. In fact, the original BeatStep just didn't have quite enough juice to drive things like ARPs or whatever, which have a higher gate input. That's been fixed in this. I don't know how they do that, because it seems kind of crazy that the amount of voltage going out is greater than the voltage coming in, but I'm sure the wizards in electronics will tell me how that's done. Now, another neat feature is the ability to add swing to individual tracks. So if I now press play on my little drum track, which is straight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the swing button, which that affects the currently selected tracks. Now I can dial in as much swing, you can see I didn't quite read that, there's swing written there. I can dial that in right up to 75%. Let's just add sort of 56, 55%, come back out, let's add, we'll go to this one, and now add 56. Now I've got swing on both of these tracks. Right, so I've got this rather derivative, let's call it techno track for now. I'm going to use that to demonstrate how we deal with the velocity track. So I'm taking the velocity output of sequence, the yellow sequence, which is the 303 style thing, and I'm going to plug that into the VCF of the error bus. So now if I just mute this track, what I'm going to do also is I'm just going to limit the steps to the first 4 of the sequencer. So now what I have to do is I make sure that my knobs are in velocity mode. So now I'm The knobs basically are directly affecting the filter cutoff of the track. Now, if I mute this and I come back and change my knobs to gate mode, so now I can turn them all right down. So now they become so I can adjust the gate length of each individual note going out. But I can also take it right up. There's a tie mode, which I'm not quite sure how that works because it doesn't seem to sound. I would have thought that this would tie this to the next note. Basically, if I mute the second step, it ties it to that, so that's how that works. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it into slide mode, which is and that gives me this kind of 303 style kind of portamento. So you get that kind of vibe going on, and it enables you to obviously modulate certain frequencies with velocity and then get that little slide thing if you're after that sort of 303. The only thing is velocity cannot be transmitted unless there is a note on that event as well. It's not possible to switch on an event without a note as far as I can tell. So you can't have like a cheeky little third track on the sequencer. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. While we're modulate certain frequencies with velocity and then get that little slide thing if you're after that sort of 303. The only thing is
I'm Glenn Darcy, Vice President of Product Management for Arturia. Today I'm going to be showing you a little bit about the BeatStep Pro sequencers. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be just talking about the melodic sequencers. Right now I just have the BeatStep connected up to a computer, just using Ableton Live for simplicity's sake here. So melodic sequencers, what they are, they're step sequencers. That means that they're quantized to a step. You can have up to 64 of these steps. That's how long the sequence can be. You can set different time divisions for how fast the sequence plays back. We'll get into some of that. But to start off quickly, there's two ways that you can input data into the sequence. One is you can just enable buttons. So we'll hit play. So every time it comes around, it's going to trigger where there's a button on. And then you can set the pitches via the knobs. And these knobs are touch knobs. So when I touch a knob, you can see the value of what that knob is. So here's knob 12, we touch it, and it's a C3. Actually, they're all C3. So why are they C3? Well, it's because we cleared the pattern to begin with. So to clear a pattern, start fresh, press the shift button and hit number 1. It's silk screen clear pattern. Now we've got an empty pattern. I'm Glenn Darcy, Vice President of Product Management for Arturia.
Hey guys, this is Bluff Monkey for Sonic Academy, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at, if I don't drop it, the BeatStep Pro. So this is a hardware sequencer that allows you to take control over your hardware synths and drum machines. Think about it as a kind of cut down version of Ableton Live, very cut down, but what you lose you gain in hands-on control and interactivity. And one of the things I've been trying to get away from with all this nonsense that I'm fond of buying is getting away from this mouth breathing, you know, the door pose. You sit there for hours on end, click, click, click. And this, using something like this just allows me to develop some kind of muscle memory for the creative process of music making, if that makes sense. So it's not just about pointing your mouse and clicking, although there's vast benefits of using a computer that I would never go back to